welcome. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with The Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that takes an in-depth look at the big stories of the day. On the program today, we're trying to make sense of the surprise deal between India and Pakistan. Both sides have, in a joint statement, of course, agreed for strict observance of the ceasefire, a ceasefire that was first formulated as far back as 2003. The joint statement seemed to come like a bolt from the blue and went on to say that the ceasefire was to achieve what both countries called sustainable peace. Now, of course, there are reports that there was back-channel diplomacy on, but this has not been commented on by the government officially here in India and has been denied by Ajit Doval's counterpart in Pakistan. But the joint statement does talk about using existing mechanisms to resolve unforeseen misunderstandings. Now, all of this is extremely ironic and telling because it's coming right ahead of the anniversary, or rather it came ahead of the anniversary of the Balakot strike, which is of course today. So what happened to the Balakot doctrine that the government has so aggressively propagated in 2019? At the same time, while this is happening between India and Pakistan, you have the hotlines opening between the foreign ministers of India and China. So while we were countries that were preparing for what was called a possible two-front war or a two-front conflict, we're actually seeing peacemaking moves on both fronts. How do we even begin to make sense of all of this? Well, we've got a house of experts to try and help us with this, and let me introduce them all one by one. We're joined on the program by Ambassador Katju, a veteran diplomat. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Happymon Jacob, strategic affairs analyst, author of an excellent book on the line of control, joins us as well. Suhasini Haidar, our best journalist, editor with The Hindu on foreign affairs, joins us as well. General Satish Dua, who's been General Officer Commanding of 15 Corps and led that first surgical strike. Remember, India has, by the way, as all of this is happening at the United Nations, defended preemptive action. So it's all very confusing what's going on. We're also joined by Michael Kugelman, who is, of course, with the Asia program, a well-known foreign policy expert. And we have with us our friend from Pakistan, again, incisive journalist and commentator, Mosharraf Zaidi. So welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure having all of you on. And I want to start with you, Suhasini, if I may, because I was really struck by your tweet, which I actually borrowed from in my introduction, that we've gone from two-front war to two-front not peace exactly, but two-front wannabe peace. And how do we even begin to make sense of this?
Well, I certainly think that the timing of this particular move with Pakistan comes at a time when India is still in the middle of its disengagement with China. And not just a month ago, we had heard from the Army Chief, General Narawane, talking about what he called a two-front situation, the collusive nature of the relationship between China and Pakistan that had been seen in the last few months in particular. So I think that while one cannot really say what led to this, and certainly I think it is a bilateral effort, it's a bilateral initiative, not necessarily under pressure or pulling from anyone outside. I do think we have to look at the geopolitical context in which the government of India has taken this decision, because let's be honest, for the last more than 3 years, we have heard a very, very tough stand from India. It has been very clearly stated that without the end of terrorism, there would be no talks at all. Now we find out not only is there a disengagement, but 2 or 3, I think you would have read newspapers, have reported that there is a back channel that is working. The National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, has been in contact with Pakistani counterparts. Now, some say it is the special advisor to the Pakistani Prime Minister, Mohib Yusuf. Others say it is General Bajwa himself that he's been in touch with. These have not been contradicted by the Indian government, although Mr. Yusuf has said that he is not the back channel diplomacy, the person involved in that. We've not seen major denials. So are we to understand that actually for the last 4 months, India and Pakistan have been engaged in this kind of a dialogue? And where does that lead? Because if it was just about the DGMO's meeting, it would be one thing. It would be an aim, aimed at bringing down the levels of violence at the LOC, which is very, very valid and very, very required. But this back channel opens up many new possibilities. And then, of course, it came at a time when External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar also spoke to his counterpart in China. Wang Yi, the two of them agreed
Yeah.
to set up a hotline between them. So it did seem like a lot of peace was breaking out suddenly.
So, yeah, and how do we understand it politically, I think is the big question, right, Ambassador Katju, because this is the Balakot strike anniversary. We have at the United Nations basically defended our right to preemptive action. We have seen nationalism politicized like never before in our mainstream politics. Words like anti-national used freely. Go to Pakistan often said to anyone who doesn't follow the dominant narrative. And now it seems as if, all along there was this sort of back channel conversation going on, even while overtly it seemed as if things had gone to sleep with Pakistan and were extremely provocative with China. I mean, how do we even begin to wrap our heads around this, Ambassador Katju?
Well, look at the first phase of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's diplomatic efforts with Pakistan. They began on the day of his inauguration in May 2014 and ended only with the after the Uri terrorist attack. He had gone to Lahore. In early 10 days within that visit, the Pathankot terrorist strike took place. And even then, he did not abandon hope. He pursued with his initiative. So his basic instinct towards Pakistan was to try to make peace with Pakistan. I think the Uri strike, the Uri terrorist attack, showed a certain approach of which the Pakistanis had adopted, and it showed a resolve and kinetic action on the Indian side. But that kinetic action was one which Pakistan could deny. The next few years, Modi kept insisting that Pakistan should change course if it wanted a meaningful relationship with India. Then came the Pulwama strike, and then, of course, the Balakot the Pulwama terrorist attack and the Balakot aerial strike. And after that was the clear enunciation of the doctrine of preemption. And that, I think, was the most significant pronouncement on the part of the Indian government. And as you've said, in the United Nations, we've defended that. And any sovereign country would defend that.
Yeah.
Now comes this. Now, I'll make two short points. One, my own experience and such as it has been in dealing with Pakistan, of course, it's very dated. But I know for a fact that I'm sorry, it's not a fact, but I can surmise through my professional judgment that this is not the product of military conversations. The wording of it, I've done a textual analysis in an article that I wrote last night, which was there today in the Quint, where I said that this is clearly a product of government to government negotiations, obviously behind the scenes. I'm not interested in who did it. Now,
but are you surprised? I mean, I think the thing is, obviously, this could not have happened, Ambassador Katju, without back channels. But how do we make sense of it politically with this government, which has been so strident otherwise?
This is exactly what I'm coming to. So it was the product of this. Now, it is obviously for the government to answer the question whether it has received any credible assurances from Pakistan that it has finally decided to abandon the use of terror. Whatever our Pakistani friend may say, and we all respect him, but the Pakistanis have, as a matter of instrument of policy, used terror against India. And given Mr. Modi's position that terror and talks can't go together, the question is Mr. Modi now going back to his 2014 to 2016 phase, or there are assurances that the Pakistanis will not undertake terror and give up the infrastructure that they have put in place? I have doubts on that because the use of terror is part of their security doctrine. But then if they've changed That's very welcome. The second
Okay.
question, which is just 1 minute, half a minute more. The second question, which is even more interesting to me, is this. The Pakistani government and the Prime Minister of Pakistan has been day in and day out for the last year and a half proclaiming that the Sangh Parivar's ideology is fascist. And he's compared this, including on the forums of the United Nations, he's compared them to Nazis, to the policies of the Nazi state. Now, how does he explain to his public that he is engaged with an India where there is simply no room available to this government on the steps it has taken on Jammu and Kashmir? And the Pakistanis have said that unless you reverse those steps, we will not engage with you. So there are a whole lot of questions now which only the government can, both governments can answer. Only they can answer.
Before I come to General Dua and Mosharraf and Happymon and Michael, so Hasani, just very quickly, I mean, speaking on the politics of it, I think for both governments, it's actually inexplicable in terms of how both governments have framed their domestic politics. If you were to take both of these governments in India and Pakistan at face value on their domestic politics, it's an inexplicable development.
It is a climb down for both in many ways. If this, as I said, conversation actually leads to much more. Look back, and I know you've covered so much of this. Every time we have seen an initiative between India and Pakistan, particularly in the last 20 years, it's always come as a surprise. It's always come out of a place where it looks like the two sides can go no further down. Right now, we're at a situation where there are no political talks. There's no high commissioners in both countries. We don't have any kind of cultural ties or people-to-people relations. We don't have trade ties between us. Trade is completely cancelled. We're in uncharted territory when it comes to the laws between India and Pakistan. Then you have highest ceasefire violations between the two sides, the kind of rhetoric Ambassador really slugging it out with the there is no way but up in a certain sense. But I think you have to understand this is the nature of India-Pakistan engagement.
Yeah, you can never predict it.
It is always going to be a surprise. It is always going to be the most unexpected thing.
Yeah, let me just get General Dua in. General Dua and then Mosharraf. General Dua, as someone who sort of led that first sort of surgical strike after the Uri terror attack, how do you feel as an army man? Now, obviously, it's soldiers. You know, this joint statement came from the DGMOs, and that was also interesting. And obviously, there's also an attempt to keep it without that kind of media frenzy that has always usually accompanied these kind of joint statements. And by the way, I think that's a smart thing. I think media scrutiny has often ruined statements in the build-up to those statements. But how do you feel as a soldier today, looking at this sudden development? It obviously looks sudden to us, but it could not have been sudden. General
Dua. First of all, I think it's a very positive development. I mean, as a military man, when I see that this hotline mechanism between the two DGMOs has something that has endured the test of time. Despite our highs and lows, the hotline exchanges have continued. They were essentially meant to sort out the border management at the LOC, to help out civilians who live across the LOC at times, to ensure that we did not escalate things out of misunderstandings and things like that. So there is, and as we've heard in this panel, and everyone knows that very well, that today very few channels, if at all, are open. Suhasini really listed out that so many channels are off. So this is one channel, whether it is military or not. I mean, it is something that is actually, that is on. Yes, the statement that we've heard, joint statement that we've seen yesterday is unprecedented. However, that it is a joint statement, a DGMO level agreement is a joint statement, I think is a statement in itself. Any measures, any steps that help saving of lives and reduce violence should be welcome. Now, on to the other side, going beyond the military realm, what I've been hearing other panelists speak, if I can just take a minute on that. Like I said, there are not many channels, if at all, are working between the two countries as of now. It has been summarized very well by other panelists. The Pakistan Army Chief, then the Prime Minister, has earlier this month made some statements which were positive steps. They were also responded to by the Indian media. With all these kind of developments taking place, I see this as a military man. I see this as a heartening sign. What we want to make of it is up for grabs as far as analysis goes.
But there's such a sense of deja vu. I mean, all of us have grown grey covering India and Pakistan. I can see it on all our faces. Like our hair has turned white. Some of us have lost hair, but it's definitely turned white. And it's always the same cycle, Mosharraf.
And I have been border doing that.
Sorry, sir. What?
And I have been doing that on the borders.
Yes, absolutely. You've been serving at the border dealing with Pakistan, and that's my point, that there's such an acute sense of deja vu. We're always so surprised when peace breaks, and then we're always so not surprised when peace collapses, and that is the cycle of our countries, and we always are mystified as to what led to it. And Mosharraf, what is the view from Pakistan? Could this have happened without months of back-channel diplomacy? It could not have. It could not have happened DGMO to DGMO. I don't think anyone's going to really believe that.
Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, first, I think I want to just echo your sentiment or what you said about growing gray. I literally, quite literally, have. I think at a personal level, Barkha and everyone on the panel, we've been at this moment before. September 2012, when I was at the Foreign Office, we had the new visa deal. We were so excited. I was so proud, of having been involved on that front. When PM Modi visited Lahore, I think I was jumping, I was over the moon. I thought that it was a huge opening. On other occasions, and it goes back a long way for some of the more experienced members of the panel. These moments of euphoria and possibility, they've been around before, but something has fundamentally changed, Barkha, and I think it would be an injustice for me to not talk about this. And I want to be able to speak about this without being interrupted. So that's why I'm prefacing it. I think it's important to remember something is broken in terms of Pakistan and the ability of people like me who've been involved in track 1, track 1.5, track 2, normalization, peace, trade, people to people. That has been the mantra for almost 2 decades of my career in terms of my involvement in these conversations. I don't think that, in all honesty and with any integrity, I'm able to be as excited in this moment as I have been in past ones. And there are 2 reasons for that. The first is the escalatory, strategic escalatory behavior of this government in India vis-a-vis the 2-year anniversary that we've been speaking about, the anniversary of Balakot. That to me is fundamentally alters how we behave, military to military and in terms of territory. And I think that the fact that it had the endorsement of many Western powers and that Indians see this as some sort of something to be proud of, that is deeply problematic for the Pakistani side. And the second, of course, and I don't think it's a big mystery, the second is August 5th. Now, with those 2 fundamental changes to how India has behaved, the fact that Pakistan has agreed to this, to me, is kind of a reward for behavior that is not peace-building behavior. It's August 5th is, we describe it as an annexation. And again, I know Indians have their own way of describing it. But a dialing down of the LOC wasn't, to begin with, a Pakistan side problem. As General Dua, I'm sure, will admit, whether it was the surgical strike of 2016 or it was the escalation of the quantum of LOC ceasefire violations, Indians have, behind closed doors and some out in the open, have celebrated the growing capacity, conventional capacity of India on the border to quote unquote punish Pakistan. And actually, they don't really punish Pakistan per se. They end up killing people in Azad Jammu and Kashmir. So essentially, the dialing down or the renewal of the ceasefire very good because hopefully less individual citizens and
Okay.
soldiers will die. But in terms of what this means longer term, I don't think we should be drawing any even tactical, what to say, of strategic conclusions, because I don't think that's what's happening here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mosharraf. Now, that was, of course, a view from Pakistan. Obviously, language is very different. What you call Azad Jammu and Kashmir, we call Pakistan occupied Kashmir. What you call annexation of August 5th, we call the abrogation of Article 370. But even in our own language, the fact that these huge, massive gaps of understanding and exist makes you wonder how the governments and the states are going to wrap their heads around it. And before I come to Happymon, who's actually studied very closely the ceasefire and how it works and doesn't work on the ground, Michael, the flood of global reactions, that's quite fascinating. There are going to be conspiracy theories linking this to the win of Biden in the US. We've seen a very, very enthusiastic response from the US State Department. Neither India nor Pakistan are going to, by the way, that's the one thing they'll agree on. They're going to tell the Americans, at least overtly, to shove it. But what's actually going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, well, certainly over the last 2 years with the India-Pakistan relationship so tense, I've frequently heard U.S. officials talk about the need to look for off-ramps. It's oftentimes the word that I hear. I have no reason to think that it was not driven organically simply by India and Pakistan. But the U.S. clearly has an interest in India-Pakistan relations stabilizing to an extent, and particularly subjecting this to the broader geopolitical picture. The U.S. really wants Pakistan to be helping it in Afghanistan with pressuring the Taliban to reduce violence and so on. And the U.S. would much prefer that Pakistan focus more on that and be less concerned about getting bogged down in its tensions with India. So, that's one reason why one could assume that the U.S. didn't necessarily have a role in driving this, but certainly would have been pleased to see how things are going and may have lent support, so to speak. I think bottom line, when you're faced with a surprising new development like what we've seen happen the last few days, with many possible explanations as to what may have driven it, I think oftentimes the actual reason comes down to something very simple. In this case, maybe it's just the fact that the ceasefire, the decision to have the ceasefire, was driven by the fact that there was just too much violence, too much killing, too much of a toll on civilians along the border. And the research of Happymon and others shows how much the ceasefire violations have intensified over the years. And I think that in and of itself can be a reason. It's a very simple explanation, but that's something to consider.
And I don't want to take that exactly to Happymon, that maybe we'd be making a mistake by reading more into this than a confined, limited ceasefire agreement. And we do have to remember that this ceasefire has been in place since 2003, first hammered out at the time that Mosharraf was president in Pakistan, Vajpayee was prime minister in India, and actually through many ups and downs and conflicts, it more or less has held, except for phases of eruption. Of course, small arms fire, Happymon, and your research will tell us a lot more, has continued, but we've seen artilleries being used rarely and in times of acute conflict. So this is one of those CBMs, confidence building measures, that's actually been one of the more successful things between India and Pakistan. How do you read this joint statement, Happymon?
Well, I think, coming in the wake of almost 5,000 ceasefire violations in 2020, which is the highest in 19 years. I think this is a path-breaking development. You have had several statements in the past from the Indian Ministry of Defense and the Pakistani government about the need to observe the ceasefire, etc., etc. In 2018, for example, you had 2 statements from the Indian side alone. But what I think makes this particular statement remarkable is that this is a joint statement by the 2 sides, and this is perhaps, therefore, in my opinion, the biggest military measure by India and Pakistan in 18 years to reduce violence on the line of control. I'm not going to speculate as to why this may have come out, but I just want to say this, that, and I completely agree with Ambassador Katju, that this is perhaps Mr. Modi going back to his initial years, 2014 and 2016. But if you look at the history of India-Pakistan relations, you would see that every prime minister has had to deal with the Pakistani state. There is no way avoiding talking to Pakistan. Vajpayee had his own troubles with Pakistan, but he eventually went back to talking to Pakistan. In fact, started the back channel in 2003, which was of course carried on by Manmohan Singh thereafter. May also say that this particular announcement perhaps also shows the realization in Islamabad and in New Delhi that they cannot afford to let violence spiral out of control, given the inherently escalatory nature of the situation. I mean, you saw what happened.
What do you make of the timing? I mean, have we all forgotten that this is the Balakot anniversary? Ambassador Katju, I'm coming to you in a second.
Well, I know it is. I mean,
is it coincidence? Is it coincidence? Is it just pure coincidence?
I think it is. I think the back channel perhaps started a couple of months ago, and this has only probably reached its logical conclusion at this point of time. And I think this is also coming from a recognition that you can talk all you want and have all kinds of rhetoric spewed out from time to time, but the reality is that you can't run a state with rhetoric alone. You have to have realistic policies. I think this is precisely that.
Before I come to Ambassador Katju, Mosharraf, just a quick 20-seconder from you in terms of political domestic politics in Pakistan, because there are domestic politics at play in both our countries. So just after what happened with the abrogation of Article 370, do you believe that there will be appetite? Because the perception in India is that leaders like Nawaz Sharif had to pay for being too soft. Pay politically for being too soft on India. So do you believe that Imran Khan as Prime Minister has that wiggle room and has the blessings of the Pakistani military? Just quickly before I come to Ambassador Katju.
I would say that if anybody's been soft on India within Pakistan, the impression is actually that Prime Minister Khan has been. The handing back of the pilot, the kind of conciliatory speech. On the day after Balakot, the Prime Minister's speech was conciliatory. He was extending a hand of friendship. I hear, even with Happymon, he mentioned, and I still have like 5 seconds. Happymon mentioned this idea of escalating rhetoric, but I really struggle. Where's the escalating rhetoric in Pakistan? Which politician has been punished for being too friendly towards India at the ballot box? Right? Whatever the dynamics are between Civ Mil are separate. But in terms of the people of Pakistan, whether it's Nawaz Sharif, whether it's anybody else, there's been a consistency in terms of wanting to outreach. So there's no price to be paid domestically for this. I think the people of Kashmir, occupied Kashmir for us, are going to be paying the price.
Okay, and India would then talk about POK, and then we would go in circles. So trying to move beyond those circles, Ambassador Katju, the question would be this to you. Do you agree that the timing is pure coincidence, that the back channel just happened to culminate on the eve of the Balakot anniversary? Question one, because what I understand about this government is that nothing is coincidental with it. Almost everything is very carefully structured. There's a plan to almost everything. Secondly, Mosharraf is actually right that the people have not punished Pakistan's leaders for being pro-India. But I would say that while nationalism is an ingredient in Indian politics, it's not clear to me that the government will pay any political price or electoral price either. Where we have 5 state elections coming up, I don't think the government is going to pay a price for this joint statement. So it kind of cuts both ways. Ambassador Katju?
A few points, Barkha.
Yeah.
I'll come to your thing. First, of course, it is extremely important that peace holds along the LOC and the international border in Jammu and Kashmir. It is important for those who live along the LOC and the border, and the civilian casualties, fatalities, even of women and children. It's terrible. So that is good. The question before us is it sustainable? And if it is to be sustainable, what steps have to be taken to back up this agreement? Because without sustainability, we'll be going around in the old, we'll be stuck in the old morass again. The third thing is, and I regret to say this, and I'm sure our Pakistani colleague will challenge this straight away, but civilians do not matter in Pakistan, even elected civilians, when it comes to Pakistan's India policy. It is well known. And it is our experience that they really don't matter. And certainly, a person, the present Prime Minister, who within his domestic politics is on the ropes. The opposition is at his throats. They are calling him a selected Prime Minister. So let us brush aside the civilians. What matters is the army commanders led by the army chief. Now, here we know for a long time, those of us who've been in the track 2 circuit were hearing from our Pakistani colleagues, and I'm revealing no secret here, that General Bajwa genuinely wanted some opening with India. He wanted to turn the page. And that we were being told that he was wanting to do this, but he found no opportunity. So he is the person who matters. The question is whether he and the army commanders have decided that they need to turn the page with India. And to turn the page with India, it would require a completely different mode of thinking in Islamabad, and more than that, in Rawalpindi.
What's your best guess, sir?
I'm sorry. I think it's important that you let me complete this. It requires a completely different set of ideas in the general headquarters on the India relationship, and within that on Jammu and Kashmir. The question is whether that realization has not only germinated, but has it taken root in Pakistan and in the Pakistan army? I don't know. I see no evidence of it. I mean, all the rhetoric of Imran Khan, the moment the army chief tells him, cool it, he will cool it. We know that. And my last point is, you asked me whether all this can be coincidental. My experience, and I dealt with Pakistan professionally for 6 years, and in all the phases of the India-Pakistan relationship were encapsulated in those 6 years, is that it is both sometimes coincidental and sometimes planned. The Vajpayee visit, the way it came about to Lahore, and I know a little about it, came about not only because of some thoughts that were going on in Islamabad and Delhi, but also because certain coincidences took place. So here too, it may have been thought that it is prudent to do this before Balakot airstrike, because this is a time when the public on both sides will expect heightened rhetoric, and therefore, if you want to cool it, do it just before that.
Or this is the time the public is distracted.
And the last point. Today, you had the EC announcing the state elections. So all of you, ladies and gentlemen, the ladies of the media, will turn your attention to these elections, and there'll be less focus on Pakistan.
That is exactly my point. And I just want to get, Mosharraf, I know you have a two-finger, but can I just get Suhasini and then come to you right away, and then General Dua? Because, we're focusing a lot on what made Pakistan flip the switch. I think, might we be making the same mistake we always do with India and Pakistan, which is attributing more value on this limited ceasefire agreement, an agreement that has actually existed in 2003 and has just been reiterated? Or is the shock value, because we were all talking about disengagement with China, how China and Pakistan were on the same side of this fight, and now we've not even spent 2 minutes talking about that hotline between India and China foreign ministers, which makes me feel there is something much larger at play here.
Well, certainly, and I think I agree with Ambassador Katju in his parsing of that joint statement between the DGMOs. If in fact it was a DGMO to DGMO decision to just bring down the violence, you would not need this kind of ceremony. You would not need a statement put out 3 days later, which has all these things about core issues being sorted out and the date and time and all of that. This was a message to both countries. Now, obviously, both sides have had such bad experiences with previous cases, and especially when it emerges that talks are taking place. That they have chosen to put this up as perhaps a trial balloon and then see how far they can go and then maybe do something more. I mean, we've seen every combination of the India-Pakistan talk situation take place over the past, even after the November 2008 attacks. We've seen it again and again, really. So I do think that, yes, there is this shock value Barkha, yes, there is a kind of political, perhaps, calculation behind the timing of it all. But what it shows us in the long term is the inevitability for even governments that have sworn off each other the way these two governments have. After all, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khans said in January, just last month, there can be nothing, there can be no talks with India until the autonomous status of Jammu and Kashmir is restored. When you have heard the kind of rhetoric we had in India, which made it very clear, people spoke very officially about an isolate Pakistan policy. Has all of that gone to the winds? Clearly, what it has shown is on both sides that there is an inevitability to bringing down the tensions. There is an inevitability to trying to discuss whether it is because China is also in a disengagement pattern, and this is something that works for China as well as for India, whether it is because Mr. Biden has come to power and he is keen that his exit from Afghanistan will only be helped if there is peace in Kashmir. I mean, we can keep going through it, but I think the longer arc of history has shown us in these last 70 years, and it's showing us yet again, that eventually moving towards less tensions, moving away from violence, moving towards some kind of engagement and dialogue becomes something every government, no matter how inimical to each other they are, begins to recognize.
That does make sense, but timing doesn't get explained by that inevitability factor, and I'm just continue to be mystified by the timing. Mosharraf, brief two-finger intervention. I need to go to General Dua after that. Go ahead, Mosharraf.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I just wanted to say, Vivek just, said something about Prime Minister Khan, which I think domestically is a conversation that Pakistanis have all the time, and I myself am not a Prime Minister Khan supporter. But I also think that Indians and Pakistanis need to turn the page from kind of maybe the sort of era that Vivek maybe represents, because I think it's easy for me to sort of pull up what Rahul Gandhi has said about Prime Minister Modi vis-a-vis Ladakh. And I could use those words, and I'm not sure that would be helpful. It wouldn't be helpful to you, Barkha, in terms of trying to engage with a wide audience where Prime Minister Modi is popular, whether you like him or Vivek likes him or I like him. He's a popular and he is the Prime Minister. Therefore, similarly with Prime Minister Khan, whatever the internal dynamics of how Pakistanis like myself might see him, he is the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And I think that we have to exercise a little bit more self-control, especially at a moment like this when the two armies have gone ahead and taken a measure like this. So, I don't need any kind of retraction, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. But I do think it's important for us to develop some instrument of mutual respect that calls for talking about the leadership in both countries in a manner that befits their office, rather than this kind of gaslighting, which is not helpful, and which I can certainly do if that's what the moment demands.
Sure, let's try. Ambassador Katju, very briefly, because General Dua has been waiting. Very briefly, sir.
I'll just make one point. I have no disrespect for Pakistan's domestic political processes. Of course, he is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and in that capacity, I respect him as any other Indian would do. We are taught how to respect Prime Ministers. But Mosharraf, I can address you. When my former diplomatic colleagues in Pakistan have told me, I'm taking no names, I'm revealing no secrets, have told me personally, Vivek, realize the realities of our country, realize what General Bajwa represents, then what do I do?
Well, I would ask you to Google. I would ask you to Google what Rahul Gandhi says about Narendra Modi.
But that's part of our Indian domestic process.
And what happens in Pakistan is part of Pakistan's domestic process. Doing these shows, because this is not useful.
No, that's why I'm saying let me try and frame it in a way that it is in fact useful. And the way to frame it in a way that is useful for us to have this conversation is how much is our foreign policy in both our countries impacted by domestic politics, not just by what one politician says about the other, but also about how power is arranged. So, for example, Mosharraf, in India, you might say that we have an extraordinarily powerful government, and that perhaps gives it the space and the wiggle room to take actions that previous governments would not have, whether it's Balakot or the opposite of Balakot, right? Just a thought put out there. Similarly, the way the military wields power in Pakistan is germane to how foreign policy is structured. So without personalizing this, let's move ahead in terms of understanding, what this does to conflict resolution. I think that is our interest at this point, how domestic politics impacts conflict resolution. General Dua, as soldier, my question to you would be a little different. Is this mixed messaging to the soldier at the LOC? Is this mixed messaging to the soldier at the LAC? That is what I want to try and understand from you, sir. General Dua.
Look, I think the message is very positive.
Yeah.
The message to the soldier, the message to the civilians living on the borders, I beg your pardon, on both sides of the LOC, because while we discuss here and while talks take place in different channels, these are the people, soldiers as well as the civilians, who actually live there and face the brunt of it all. I've been hearing with interest the discussions on timing of it. May I offer a professional opinion in addition to whatever else may have been discussed?
Yes.
It is an annual cycle that during these last 3 months, the passes are closed. The LOC, LC, trans-LC firing, the ceasefire violations as we call them, and the infiltration attempts are next to nil, because posts have been thinned out and posts have been vacated on both sides because of snow. So whatever is the level of talks, whichever is the channel that is working, this is the time that it has to start talking about it. And like we've all spoken enough, that what we can't deny the inevitability of it, or the fact that we are neighbors. We are going through different paces. We'll not talk to each other, or we will talk to each other when this happens. But the fact is, we are neighbors. It has to dawn on us that we have to live together, whether we fight or not.
Yeah.
So having said that, so the timing of it is actually after the winters. The timing is also the fact what the channels, perhaps whoever has decided, and I'm happy to hear if there are different elements of power are plugging in together, both sides, is actually a good thing. But they have not shied away from making an announcement. Let's say it's a coincidence. Then they haven't shied away from making an announcement just because the Balakot anniversary was coming up. But also, last point I'd like to say, that things were happening on the LAC for so long, at least in India, our focus was that side all along. And suddenly this comes as a surprise to us. So all the more reason. Be that as it may, the last sentence I'd like to say, I think no one can deny that this is a welcome development, and we can keep analyzing it.
The question, Michael, might be that we need to be able to join the dots, even though governments would not concede those dots officially. There's something, there are too many moving pieces for this all to be a coincidence. The Biden win, what that does to US China, what it does to US Afghanistan, the fact that we're all trying to emerge from COVID. There are so many different factors at play here. How can we just sort of pretend that all of these dots do not get joined somewhere? And if you had to, Michael, join the dots, how would you join them?
Well, I really don't know. It's true. There's so many factors that are floating around. I think that both Pakistan and India do benefit militarily from this decision. I mean, as I understand it, Pakistan had to redeploy troops away from the erstwhile tribal areas closer to the border with India. It would rather probably reverse that. And of course, India now, I would think, will have more of an opportunity to focus on what would appear to be its broader, greater strategic concern, and that's its border with China. I think that at this point, optimism is warranted, but should be measured. The joint statement had said that the two sides would be focusing on, quote, core issues, core concerns with the greatest risk of violence. And to me, that suggests an intention to talk about issues like Kashmir. And I just don't see the government in India wanting to go there, especially after the Article 370 move. So to me, that suggests that while there's momentum now for more things to be done, I'm not sure how far things can go. And perhaps that's where the Biden administration would want to be useful, to try to push both sides along. It could be a while before we know exactly what the key factors were that drove the developments leading to this truce.
Yeah. Happymon, I think that's an important point, that this might be very much a thaw that is confined to the LOC, to the line of control. And we can't divorce it from the fact that there is suddenly a hotline between India and China as well. Like, do you see those as connected developments?
Just on that point, I think it is important to recognize that this is a piecemeal arrangement on the line of control alone. And I am quite certain that this will have diminishing returns in the months and years to come, if it is not part of a larger conversation on India-Pakistan relations. So unless you can't really have a conversation only on the line of control and sort of divorce everything else from that. So unless until there is a larger scheme in order to address all the outstanding issues, I think this will have a certain shelf life. In any case, I think to answer your question, clearly, I think there is a recognition within Delhi that the country is confronted with a two-front challenge, and there is a need to sort of diffuse one challenge at a time. And I think this conversation with Pakistan began several months ago. It has now concluded. It, in fact, began much before the rapprochement, or rather disengagement with the Chinese. So clearly, I think the recognition that you need to diffuse the two-front situation is a major one. And more importantly, if I may sort of risk saying this, I think China is the grand strategic challenge. It is important for New Delhi to look at its strategic environment and realize what China is and what Pakistan is. For me, Pakistan is clearly a problem that needs to be resolved, but China is the threat. I think the earlier, the sooner we realize it is good for a country, it is good for us as a country.
Okay, I need to start taking last comments, and I'll start with you, Happymon, because you already have the mic. You're saying that it will have diminishing returns if it doesn't build into something larger. But given that the gap on the Kashmir question has increased manifold after the abrogation of 370, the cliched sentence in all India Pakistan joint statements used to be India's concerns on terrorism, Pakistan's concerns on Kashmir. What sort of framework can anything beyond this joint statement take, given what's happened with 370? Happymon, I'll start with you.
Clearly, I think the first thing to do is to sort of restart the cross-LOC trade between the two sides. It is not really very difficult to do that. And secondly, restart the Wagah-Atari border trade. And I'm hearing some rumors about the possibility of that restarting. I think these are the first two steps that can be done at this point of time. India has clearly reached out to the Kashmiris in many ways. The DDC elections were conducted. You have 4G internet that is restored. Foreign diplomats and journalists are visiting Kashmir. So the outreach is in the process, which is, of course, an internal process in any way, in any case. But I think vis-a-vis Pakistan, what needs to be done is clearly the trade along the LOC and the Wagah-Atari border, the trade between the two sides.
So let me ask you this, Mosharraf, as a last comment. What structure could a conversation take beyond this joint statement, given the gigantic gap in the perceptions on what's happened in Jammu and Kashmir?
Barkha, I appreciate, thank you. I appreciate the acknowledgement that there is a massive gap. I think just even with Happymon's comments there and kind of my internal reaction, which I won't articulate just now, I don't, I think, let me frame something in a way that, again, may upset some friends in India, but I think it's important for friends to hear this. This excitement about perhaps managing Pakistan, this was preceded by the look east and kind of ignore Pakistan, isolate Pakistan, and now, that China is the big strategic threat. Well, the evidence from Balakot is that, even the conventional superiority that India claims it has and that Pakistanis often acknowledge it has isn't quite that superior, right? And the way things played out in Balakot was evidence. Clearly with China, not just in terms of what happened at the LAC, but from an economic standpoint, the gap in power is massive. I think the best path forward for India is actually to think of itself as an equal sovereign state to other sovereign states in the region that it occupies, to give up the idea of grand hegemonic design and to engage in trade with China, with Pakistan, engage with CPEC, and give up the attempted and sustained occupation of Kashmir. Now, that will not land kindly on Indian ears, and I understand that. And I think it's important for Indians to be able to hear that and to kind of think about history in the way that it actually happened, rather than this some grand design that India actually has a chance in its strategic competition, so to speak, with China.
Okay, now what I'm going to let General Dua respond to the couple of points that you've made, and to hear it is important, not for the reasons, Mosharraf, that you might think, but I think it reminds us in both countries of the distance, of the fact that we're going to turn around and say POK every time you say CPEC, and we're going to turn around and say Mumbai and Jaish and Lashkar every time you say something about human rights in Kashmir, and we can keep carrying on like this, and we've been carrying on like this for decades. General Dua, I want you to come in on this point, that there is a very clear Indian position and then there is a Pakistani position, and this statement, while welcome, cannot and does not address that, and I actually do not see the framework for these issues and these gaps to be addressed. General Dua.
True, Barkha. I'd go with you to say and agree that I beg your pardon, that this is, please remember, this is whatever we may analyze it as, it is a DGMO level talk. It is meant for sorting out problems on the line of control, both of soldiers and civilian lives. And it is actually that just because it happens in an environment over the last few months or year plus, where talks or other engagements have broken down, and the fact that the joint statement has been issued, so we are making more of it. So what I would like to say, let's not place too much of responsibility on this statement itself or this breakthrough. Let us take this as a breakthrough at the tactical level at the moment. Go with cautious optimism as how it proceeds ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to say one step at a time, and that's the way to go, rather than imagine that now suddenly all is hunky-dory. No. It cannot happen. So let's go ahead from there. And like I said, I'll just end with that sentence. Anything that saves lives of soldiers and civilians alike is a good sign. And let's go step by step and not imagine grandstanding the small statement, which I said is a statement in itself. Thank you.
I think we could. I think we could actually all agree, General Dua, with what you've just said. Michael, you want to briefly get in a word?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the important thing is to figure out ways to maintain the momentum of the last few days, and I think that could entail looking for CBM opportunities in the non-security space. I think it's unrealistic to think that these two sides are going to start talking about the status of Kashmir or about the terrorism issue, but if you look at examples like more cooperation on combating the pandemic, there's been a little bit of that, but not all that much. Also trying to revisit common interest in connectivity projects in South and Central Asia. You have the TAPI pipeline, for example. And also looking to the opportunities to try to scale up cooperation between India and Pakistan within multilateral settings, like the various regional organizations that both countries are members of, like the SCO or the Heart of Asia Conference. Yeah. I think that's the best way to go about it, and just to try to maintain the momentum, try to maintain some of the modest goodwill that's been built up. I think that's a modest way forward.
Modest goodwill, I think, is a good way to describe it. So, Suhasini, do you think that we've missed speaking about China enough as a factor in the larger game at play, such as the game might be, that we don't actually fully understand?
Well, I definitely think you cannot divorce what happened at the LAC. The fact is that these have been part of the calculations now, and they will be. For regardless of what kind of a disengagement we have with the LAC, India is going to need to man much more closely, much more intensely its 3,000-kilometer line with China than it has ever done before. That is going to cause all kinds of new dynamics for India's strategic calculations. And certainly, I'm sure those are being done. Does a constantly tense situation with Pakistan help India in any way? I think that needs to be talked about. So in that sense, I think China is a part of it. But I know that we don't have much time, Barkha, so I do want to make this point. We are embarking, perhaps, only perhaps, if this DGMO statement means something more, and there has been some kind of a back channel, embarking on another cycle of India-Pakistan engagement. Let's learn something from the past. Let's firstly not raise unnatural expectations from what this process can achieve. Let's start to take our own people into confidence. Let's make the case inside our countries for peace across the border before we make them, we pull out these surprise rabbits out of a hat, because when things go bad, it doesn't help that you've surprised people. It only helps if you've already made the case internally, politically, that there must be a case for talks, that it will be a sustainable process. And finally, let's just hope that the public narrative of both sides has learned enough lessons from the past to make this, and to compliment you on this particular show, to make this the kind of reasoned conversation that we have experienced over here as well, into the way we discuss India and Pakistan, because eventually people's lives do matter.
Yeah, thank you, Suhasini. Ambassador Katju, I'll let you wrap this up for us. If you were to advise our government, what would you be saying to them at this point? And what I think Suhasini raises a very, very important point. All of us have been India-Pakistan watchers and players in some ways. Some of you have been in service in government and military. What's the one lesson from the past that we should not be, a mistake from the past that we should not be repeating at this point?
Look, as someone who's been professionally and otherwise involved in Indo-Pak conversations, there's no one more than me who desires genuine peace between India and Pakistan. It's important, but at the same time, I think we can't ever abandon realism. And realism cautions me to draw lessons from the past. And that is why, Barkha, I said that I fervently hope that there is changed thinking in Pakistan about India. India is and I'm not saying this out of, just gratuitously. India is and acknowledges itself to be a developing country. We just happen to be large. And if our neighbors are small compared to us, there's precious little that we can do. Certainly, we can't overlook our interests. Now, if that is considered hegemony, then I'm afraid it fills me with dismay, because the past has taught me that unless these attitudes change, especially among a section of our Pakistani friends, especially in the men in khaki, I will continue to remain pessimistic despite all my desire for genuine peace between India and Pakistan. The last point I'll say, of course, we are faced with a two-front situation. Whatever our Pakistani friends may say, I've written about this, and I will not be popular with many Indians, but I've written about this, that it is ironic that over the last many decades, and my Pakistani friends may get infuriated, but India has become in some ways to China what Pakistan is to us, except that objective factors relating to resources, size, and other things, which require too much of detail, teaches me that we can reverse this situation in the power calculus. We can close the gap. Unfortunately, the Pakistanis cannot. And that is the objective reality. So with that, I will end. That we don't want hegemony, we want peace. Honestly, I'm not saying this because it is just plain platitudes. It is. We need it. But we can't have the bloodshed of our innocence. And that is what terrorism is. And if the Pakistanis for the last 30 years, the occupation of Kashmir, for the last 30 years had thought that they will break our will, they should realize they will not. And on Kashmir, my last word.
70 years, and you haven't been able to break the Kashmiris' will.
Please be realistic. Realism.
It is realistic. Your occupation and annexation has led to nothing.
That is why
it's very unfortunate.
Come on, guys. Okay, Mosharraf, we know Pakistan has a position in Kashmir. We know it's diametrically opposite to the Indian position. I think that is well known. I think the Indian anguish over terrorism is a very seriously and deeply felt one. And I think Ambassador Katju has manifested that and spoken for all of us on that. Let's leave it there. We're trying to see where we can go with these deep differences. What you call occupation, we call POK, what you call rights, we call terrorism. And there is also terrorism that has taken place outside of Kashmir. 2008, the Mumbai strikes is something that I would drive home at this point. So let's just leave it there. Ambassador Katju, I'll let you complete your sentence before I say goodbye. You were wanting to complete a sentence, please.
Yes, that is why I remain, even though I fervently desire peace, at this juncture, having seen this cycle again and again and again, I remain pessimistic, but I fervently hope I'm wrong. No one will be more delighted than me to be proved wrong.
I'm going to thank my panel. India-Pakistan conversations are never simple to have because the gaps are just so wide, not just between the states, but even between us as journalists, us as soldiers, us as diplomats. It is after all about our identities as Indians and Pakistanis, and I think we can understand that we come from very different, places of national pride, let's say it. We come from very different places in the way that we identify on these issues, but we've made an effort here, and the one lesson I think we all can acknowledge is that you never know what the hell is happening till it happens, and then it doesn't happen. And that has been the cycle. Leaving it there, thanking all of you for remaining civil and calm in this conversation, despite some tense moments, and helping me along there. Thank you very much, and I'm hoping to see a lot more of you on the Mojo Story, and thank you for coming. And thank you to our audience for watching. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.